30 BC. A civilization that has endured for over 3,000 years is about to fall. At its heart stands one woman, queen, strategist, lover, ruler. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh. Few names echo through time like hers. Cleopatra, the seventh Philopator, last of the Ptolemies, heir to a Macedonian legacy, ruling Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Fluent in 9 languages, master of statecraft, worshipped as a goddess, vilified as a temptress. She had already seduced the most powerful man in Rome, Julius Caesar, and borne him a child. Now she ruled beside his successor, Marc Antony. Together, they reigned as Eastern monarchs, dreaming of a new Roman-Egyptian empire. But in the west, a shadow grew. Octavian, Caesar's heir, shrewd and unyielding, declared war not just on Antony, but on Cleopatra herself, and the world would never be the same again. The year is 34 BC. Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, reigns from Alexandria, the jewel of the Mediterranean. At her side, Marc Antony, Rome's great general and her lover. They've just returned from campaigns in the east, proclaiming their children as rulers of foreign lands. Rome watches in horror. In the grand donation of Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony declared Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar, as King of Kings. Their twin children with Antony were given Armenia, Media, and Cyrenaica. Cleopatra herself was styled Queen of Kings. To Rome's Senate, this was blasphemy. To Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and Antony's rival, it was open provocation. The triumvirate had dissolved. Now there would be only one ruler. The lines were drawn. As everyday life continued in and around the palace, amongst Cleopatra and Antony's royal household, the servants, slaves, and scribes all silently but majestically got on with their duties. As it is in life, even in such a renowned household, if you worked hard enough and stood out without being too obvious, you could progress. And the more you progress, the greater stature you hold in the household. You could be born a slave in the palace kitchens and work your way up. You could even be educated. Cleopatra valued knowledge, and her personal servants, slaves and scribes, were always around her, always silent but aware, and for the smart ones, always learning. That autumn, Alexandria changed. There was tension in the stones. The queen had spies in Rome. Every letter from the west was received with tight jaws and anxious eyes. I remember the day word came. Octavian was mobilizing the Senate. War was coming. Marc Antony insisted on building a fleet. Cleopatra opened her coffers. Gold, grain, timber, everything for war. Even in her fear, she stood proud. Regal, determined to fight as pharaohs had for millennia. Egypt had survived Persian conquest, civil wars, even the madness of her own royal bloodline, but this time, she faced not just a rival nation, but the formidable war machine of Rome itself. 31 BC. The Mediterranean held its breath. Antony and Cleopatra assembled 500 ships. Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, was already cutting off their supply lines. Their war would culminate at Actium, a coastal point on the Ionian Sea. Cleopatra was no bystander. She financed the war, commanded her own fleet, and rode with her troops. Her navy was sleek and fast, manned by Egyptian sailors and Greek mercenaries. Aboard the queen's vessel at Actium, a slave who had worked in Cleopatra's household was there as a runner, taking messages, translating orders. But for those serving Cleopatra on her ships, They saw her not just as their queen, but as their commander. She wore no jewels, only bronze. She barked at captains like they were children. Antony drank and raged, but Cleopatra calculated. On September 2nd, the sea boiled. Octavian's fleet, better disciplined and lighter, formed a tight blockade. Cleopatra's ships were larger, floating fortresses, but slow. Agrippa struck with precision. Chaos unfolded. Amid the confusion, Cleopatra's flagship broke formation. With a sudden turn, she sailed east, retreating with 60 ships. Antony saw her fleeing and followed. Historians debate whether it was prearranged or panic, but the result was clear. With their leaders gone, Antony's fleet disintegrated. A rout. We waited in silence as the wind carried the stench of oil and blood. Cleopatra stood at the prow, unmoving, her eyes fixed westward. She had survived, but I think she knew then, Egypt had not. News reached Rome like wildfire. Octavian returned triumphant. Statues of Cleopatra were defiled, her name cursed. In Egypt, the queen returned to a city half mourning. Her allies had fled. Her generals blamed each other. Even Antony had changed, brooding, silent, prone to fits of rage. Upon everyone's return, things felt different. Scrolls went uncopied. Scholars spoke in whispers. Our city, once the cradle of knowledge, was now a stage for the final act in an elaborate play. In the wake of Actium, the Mediterranean trembled. Cleopatra and Antony returned to Alexandria in shame. Their fleets shattered, their armies dwindling, their hopes bleeding. Still, Cleopatra did not yield. She prayed to Isis, invoked ancient rites, summoned her priests. If the gods demanded sacrifice, she would offer everything but surrender. Antony grew erratic, hopeful one day, despondent the next. He raised what forces remained, fortifying the city's walls. Cleopatra, ever calculating, began diplomatic maneuvers. It's thought Cleopatra's closest and most trusted servants met in secret, with Octavian's agents under cover of night, where Cleopatra offered her surrender, but with one condition, that her children live. The secret assignations went unanswered. Octavian remained silent to her offer of surrender. To Cleopatra, that silence could only be taken as a threat. Rumors spread that Cleopatra might betray Antony to save her throne, that she would offer herself to Octavian, as she had once done with Caesar. "You think I would choose Rome over you?" she demands. "I think you would choose survival," Antony replies. In July of 30 BC, Octavian reached Alexandria. The city's fate was sealed. Antony fought with desperation, but loyalty had eroded. His army collapsed. He returned to the palace, wounded, haunted. A messenger arrived. Cleopatra was dead by suicide. Grief-stricken, Antony fell on his own blade. But it had been a lie, a ruse to protect her. Cleopatra cradled him as he died. Rome's last great general, undone by ambition and love. Octavian entered the palace soon after. He allowed Cleopatra to bury Antony, then confined her to her chambers. Her son, Caesarion, was smuggled away. Cleopatra sent gifts to Octavian. She met him once, and knew then she would never leave Egypt alive. On August 12th, Cleopatra and her handmaidens sealed themselves in her tomb. She wore her crown. August 12, 30 BC. Cleopatra is dead, her tomb now sealed, her story nearly ended. But history does not stop at the moment of death. The true conquest of Egypt begins here. Octavian remained in Alexandria for weeks after Cleopatra's death, not in grief, but in preparation. He took control of Egypt's treasury, seizing immeasurable gold reserves to pay his legions, and secure his future empire. The queen's legendary wealth would bankroll his rise as Rome's first emperor. But what happened to all of her children? Cleopatra had 4 children. The most famous, Caesarion, was her son by Julius Caesar. After her death, Octavian sent envoys to find him. He made it as far as Thebes before being lured back under false promises of mercy. Octavian had him executed. His death marked the end of the Ptolemaic bloodline, but her 3 younger children, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, lived. Octavian took them to Rome. There, he paraded them in chains during his triumph, trophies of his eastern conquest. In a final twist of fate, Cleopatra Selene was later married off to Juba II, a North African prince allied with Rome. She became Queen of Mauritania, and through her, the blood of Cleopatra endured. But who ruled Egypt? Egypt was no longer a kingdom, it was now a Roman province, ruled directly by Octavian, who named himself Pharaoh in title only. But unlike other provinces, Egypt was special. Octavian did not place a senator in charge. He ruled through a governor called the Praefectus Egypti, always an equestrian, never a senator, to keep Rome's elite from gaining control over its richest region. For the people of Egypt, daily life changed slowly but deeply. Taxes grew heavier. Temples, once supported by Ptolemaic gold, went into decline. The native priesthood held on, but their influence waned under Roman rule. The city that had once been the jewel of the Mediterranean, home of the great library, the lighthouse, and the most brilliant minds of the age, was now Rome's colony. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, ensured Cleopatra would not become a martyr. He reshaped her memory into a cautionary tale, the exotic temptress who brought down mighty men. But the truth endured in whispers, in memories, in the stories passed down by those who served her and those who still worshipped her as a goddess. Cleopatra's death was not just the end of a life, it was the end of an age. With her fall, 3,000 years of Egyptian independence were extinguished. Never again would a native or Ptolemaic ruler sit on the throne of the pharaohs. Her final gambit failed, but her legend did not. For centuries after, travelers, poets, historians, and conquerors would speak her name, in awe, in scorn, in wonder. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, the final flame of an ancient world. Ashes and empires may fade, but stories, real stories, survive. In the ashes of empires, stories survive. Some rise again, others are only whispered. This is one of them. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to Ashes and Empires, real stories, lost empires,